Hello, and welcome! Welcome to the part 1 of my video series on DC20 RPG, a new and upcoming tabletop role-playing game in development from the Dungeon Coach and the Dungeon Company. Today, we'll be talking about some of the things that I'm most excited for. Today's episode will cover the classes and the innovative stamina and mana system. But before we dive in, I just want to make it clear that I'm not a part of the development team, and all my information comes from the Dungeon Coach's YouTube channel, Patreon, and Discord, and everything I know is subject to change. So let's dive in. Get ready to take a sip of water every time I say classes in this video. DC20 is going to have a ton of classes, divided into archetypes like Warrior, Warden, Specialist, Mage, Enlightened, Zealot, and Occultist. Each archetype is going to have about 2 to 4 classes in. In the recent Patreon game development live streams, we brainstormed ideas of what we thought each class should feel like and play like. DC20 RPG is going to have many of the familiar classes that you know from D&D 5e, but with a fresh coat of paint to make them feel new and exciting. So let's take a little sneak peek at some of the new classes that I'm most excited for. The Beastmaster class is an interesting one. Like the Beastmaster Ranger subclass from 5e, you're able to control a beast in combat to fight alongside you. But the key difference in DC20 RPG is that the beast itself is actually the main fighting force. The actual master is relatively weak, with about a 90-10 split in the power. Your beast will be customizable as you level up, and your subclass can let you specialize it with more options. The summoner, similar to the Beastmaster, also fights alongside a companion. The key difference is that the power split between them is more 50-50. The summoner is a caster that uses mana, and the summoned creature will use stamina. More on mana and stamina in a little bit. The summoner will act as a support and buffer for their summoned creature and their allies, while the summoned creature is the main damage dealer and will do most of the actual fighting. One idea that was tossed around in the live streams was that they would have a shared pool of HP, which I think is really cool. When it comes to the Shapeshifter, you can think about them as a moon druid but just as a whole class. They'll have subclass options that give them a wider variety of forms that they can take on, such as demonic, monstrous, and celestial, just to name a few. There's also a potential for them to transform into customized creatures using a sort of point-by feature list. Maybe you'll spend a couple points getting wings and a couple points getting horns and just turn into a flying goat. The Elementalist is the Avatar class. Though focused more on the caster side than the martial arts side, you'll take on elemental stances to gain bonuses in the matching element. Choose an element at level 1, like a fighting style, and pick up more at later levels. They're capable of summoning elementals to help fight or to channel their abilities through them. This class was on the chopping block, but it looks like it might have been saved. Classes in DC20 can also be divided into martial and caster classes, with a few hybrid classes thrown in for good measure. Casters in DC20 don't use spell slots, but instead use a mana point system. You'll still have access to cantrips which cost 0 mana points, but your actual spells will all cost at least 1 mana point. A general rule is that a spell's level is equal to its base mana cost. When it comes to upcasting your spells, you can pour more mana points into them to alter them in different ways. Here's an example of how that might work. We'll take the first level spell, Fire Blast. It's a single target fire damage spell that can apply the burning condition. To cast this spell, you must first spend 2 action points and 1 mana. More about action points can be found in the video here. You can enhance this spell by spending more mana points. Fire Blast has an option that will let it turn into something like Scorching Ray. You can spend an additional mana point to shoot out a second blast, and each extra mana point on top of that you can add another blast. Or, you can spend 2 mana points to make your Fire Blast explode in an area of effect. The max amount of mana points you can spend on one spell, your spell limit, is equal to your combat modifier, about half your level. So you can't just blow your entire load on one singular nuclear bomb. So for example, if you were level 10, you could spend 5 mana points on a single spell. So how that might look with Fire Blast is you can spend 1 mana point for the initial cost, another 2 mana points to add 2 more blasts, and then another 2 mana points on top of that to make them all explode in an area of effect. Another thing that I'm excited for in DC20 is that caster classes will each have their own way of interacting with spells and mana. Wizards might have a mechanic where they can choose a school of magic, and they'll either have a special pool of mana which they can only spend on that school, or they'll have a way to enhance spells from that school at a cheaper cost. But all of this will be determined through playtesting. Sorcerers will have fewer spells known, but will be able to shape and mold them more freely than other casters with metamagic. They might have a mechanic where they can still cast spells at 0 mana, with the risk of exhausting themselves and a chance of a wild magic surge. There were even talks about sorcerers having a special transformation based on their bloodline. Warlocks would be highly customizable with pacts and invocations, but would have a lower mana pool because the power isn't their own. Warlocks can make up for their lower mana pools by sacrificing their health to boost their spells. They may even have ways to boost their cantrips. Martial classes, from fighters to warlords to monks, everything in between, will have a special resource called stamina, which they will gain in different ways, and they can spend it on techniques.
You're not doing the technique.
These techniques will work similar to the Battlemaster's maneuvers. The stamina pool for martial classes is much smaller than a caster's mana pool, but unlike casters who can generally only recover their mana after a rest, martial classes all have different ways to recover their stamina. One class may gain stamina when they land a hit, another may recover stamina if they avoid a hit, and yet another may gain stamina if they help an ally. A small stamina pool and the ability to recover stamina encourages you to utilize your
Technique.
for more variety in combat. Another benefit of stamina and techniques is that they help bridge the gap between martial and caster classes in games like D&D 5e, where casters are generally just much more versatile and powerful than their martial counterparts. I had originally intended to cover more in this video, but once I started writing the script, I realized I had much more to say about each part than I initially thought. I want to try and keep these videos short and sweet, so I've decided to split it off into parts. This video covered some of the classes that I'm looking forward to, and the stamina and mana system. In part 2, I hope to cover character customization, multi-classing, and the new way that damage is handled in DC20 RPG. So be sure to absolutely pulverize the subscribe and bell button so you don't miss out. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.